Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table, discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week. What are you bringing to the table today?
I bring an article called Precrime is No Longer Science Fiction by Sarah Fathallah. It's another article in the series about carceral AI that was published by Inquest back in April of this year. And it's an exploration of different technologies that the criminal punishment system is using to try to lock up more people or catch more people doing stuff that they think they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And Sarah opens this article with a story about a person who is misidentified by the NYPD through facial recognition. And she expands on additional tech that is being used in our carceral systems beyond facial recognition, which in its own right is horrific.
Yes.
And terrible. She says, stories of misidentified faces may receive the most public attention, but biometric technologies far beyond facial recognition are being currently deployed for carceral means. They encode and turn into data not just people's face shapes, but also their irises, their walks, and even their veins. Increasingly, they're combined with predictive analytics to go beyond identification. Today, they might be used to predict, categorize, and infer who might be a suspect, who might be lying, who might be risky, and who might reoffend. By introducing an element of speculative imagination, these systems create racialized suspects before any wrongdoing has occurred. And this continued expanse of technology to figure out how the carceral systems can collude with tech companies to further criminalize more of us is not surprising.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of the article we read from the series a couple weeks ago, but it doesn't make it less infuriating, particularly considering how expansive this all seems, and again, the individual stories that pop up in how these things really harm people and create challenges for them for a long, long time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say thank you again for bringing us back to this incredible series by Inquest, because it's so good. I'm excited for us to continue to dig into it and learn from it. But your introduction there just reminded me of just how scary this all is too, and dystopian and wild. I mean, to think about, you said tracking people's irises and their walks and their veins. I mean, and the decoding that's happening. I mean, it's really just so science fiction-y wild, but this is happening to real people.
Yep.
And I was also struck by that story that you mentioned that Sarah opens the piece with, because it's of course a story that we've heard time and time again. It was a black man that was wrongfully arrested by the NYPD because of this facial recognition technology. And the technology was so wrong. I think they were looking for someone shorter and lighter, all the things. That person wasn't even there, but it's another example and reason enough to demonstrate why this biometric carceral AI technology is just dangerous. Like one example is enough to me, but it continues. And then I was also struck by Sarah's analysis of this carceral biometric technology and the unpredictability of it. And I don't think that's probably a strong enough word to describe what it is, but
You're right.
That quote that you shared from the piece where Sarah talks about how this technology is being used to predict and categorize and infer who might be a suspect, who might be lying, who might be risky, and who might reoffend. That use of the word "might" really got me when I read it.
Yeah,
We're talking about technology that in most cases and most applications is speculative at best. It's guessing at the information that it's taking in. But the real danger here is that, agencies and law enforcement using this technology, using that information to then make their decisions there. And courts. And those decisions are targeting and criminalizing and convicting innocent people. It's leading to racially biased decisions. It's drawing incorrect and false conclusions. And at the end of the day, it's harming people. And so to me, it's all just so wrong and so dangerous.
Yeah, and one of the things that she goes on to talk about, and I found really frustrating, and I don't remember learning about it in our previous article, so I think it was new, a new concept to to this article was using DNA to create sketches of people, which connects back to these biases that you were talking about and perpetuating the things that already exist through technology.
Right.
And so Sarah says, quote, while biometric data has historically been used for identification, matching fingerprints against a database, for example, recent developments in machine learning have enabled the emergence of forensic DNA phenotyping, where the facial appearance of a person is predicted based on their genetic material. The idea is that an approximation of someone's face, typically sketched by a composite artist based on surveillance video or eyewitness recollection, might now be extrapolated from a DNA sample. This approach raises serious concerns. As race after technology author Ruha Benjamin notes, the relationship between genes and facial variation is not at all clear. The link between genetic material and facial appearance remains scientifically tenuous at best. It leaves room for law enforcement to draw speculative and racially biased conclusions, often producing suspect images that amount to what ACLU analyst Jay Stanley described as a very generic-looking black man. Rather than narrowing a suspect pool, DNA phenotyping often produces a new racialized figure of suspicion. And there's a lot in here.
Yes.
And it's clearly an extension of this really terrible dystopian use of technology that all of these companies and the criminal punishment system seem dead set on using.
Yes.
And it's an evolution, but not an improvement, an evolution of eyewitness sketches, right? You're catching some small marker of DNA,
right,
and then using a computer to say, yeah, that's probably what it looks like, which is really no better than some of the racially biased things that happen in moments like that, where people see somebody like, yeah, this is what they look like.
Absolutely.
And it's not, because usually it's not. And that person's also translating for an artist who has to. So already that was fraud.
Yeah.
And now we're introducing made up phenotyping around what facial structure looks like. It's really, really nonsense. And it reminds me of the phrenological skulls in the 18th and early 19th century, which was, this race of people's skull looks like this, and this race of people's skull looks like this, and this is why these skulls are better. And look, because this is the brain, and these are the centers of the brain, and if this race's skull is shaped like this language center, this critical thinking center is smaller.
Yes.
So therefore, they're not as able to critically think.
Yeah.
And that junk race science is, I think, a direct through line to what we're seeing now.
Absolutely.
In this. It's just a nice little sheen of 21st century, so to speak, DNA science, and it's really just made up in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, it's just a different application. Here, we're talking about it in the criminal punishment system. That example is such a great example. It connects to even, medical training and what the racism that exists in the medical field based off of all of that 18th century, those drawings and whatnot. So
especially around pain,
but also, right, as you say, around intelligence, critical thinking, and all of that. I mean, all of that was that junk science. And so, there's so much there about that DNA phenotyping that it was just like bonkers to me.
Yeah.
She talks about a lot more things in this piece as well. One of the other examples of this dangerous technology is this tech that tracks eye movements to apparently identify deception. So Sarah shares this in the piece, quote, Eye Detect, developed by Utah company Converus, claims that it can identify whether someone may be lying by analyzing involuntary ocular movements during a 30-minute AI-driven screening or a 15-minute single-issue diagnostic. On its website, iDetect claims that it accurately tests job applicants, employees, patients, parolees, drug users, athletes, criminal suspects, and others about specific issues or crimes. The science underlying iDetect has been widely challenged. Contrary to iDetect's slogan, it seems that the eyes do lie. Research shows no consistent way to link eye movements to lying. For decades, scientists have warned that lie detection based on physiological signals is deeply unreliable, essentially junk science. Because polygraphs depend on nearly arbitrary interpretations of data, they can become vehicles for racial bias. Like the more traditional lie detection tools that came before it, eye tracking technologies risk granting law enforcement scientific-looking cover for biased judgments. And here's the kicker of all of this. Sarah goes on to say, quote, despite its shaky foundations, Converis's clients include the federal government and 21 state and local law enforcement agencies. While most courts still reject polygraph results as evidence, iDetect has been admitted in at least one New Mexico case. So, this eye movement tracking technology is bogus, right? And it's been proven to be bogus. But the federal government and law enforcement agencies across the country are using it. And so I think the first thing I just said out loud was, how is any of this okay? And I think the point of all of this in our conversations about it is that, it's not okay and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah, I mean, reading this article, it's easy to just go, this is bad. We shouldn't do this. Bad. And just say that over and over again as you go through it. And one of the other pieces of this is called voice printing.
Oh, yeah.
Which, quote, identifies individuals based on the unique characteristics of their voices. It allows correctional facilities to identify who is speaking on any given call and to search for other calls featuring the same voice. Which on its face sounds stupid to me for a lot of reasons, not to mention the inherent violation of privacy. That I understand the way that the criminal punishment system works is that people who are incarcerated lose most of that, if not all of it.
Right.
And so I get how the system works. That doesn't mean it's how it should work.
Absolutely.
So Sarah goes on to say, quote, there is no scientific consensus on the validity of automatic speaker recognition, and experts recommend exercising extreme caution when using voice recognition as evidence in court. Even Securis's 2016 patent acknowledges that each given person's vocal tract characteristics actually vary in a number of ways depending on the time of day, how much the person has been talking that day, and how loud, whether or not the person has a cold, and other factors. But prisons continue to collect voice prints and build growing databases. At least 200,000 voice prints have been stored thus far.
Wow.
Sometimes prisons pressure incarcerated people to give up their voice samples by threatening a complete loss of communications privileges to those who decline. In other instances, they enroll incarcerated people in voice recognition programs without their knowledge or consent. New York alone, for example, had already enrolled 92% of its incarcerated population by 2019.
Wow.
Yeah, this is absurd. It's so much data. It's invasion of privacy. It's clear how inaccurate this is through their own patent.
Yes.
I mean, I think about the way that my own voice changes to myself, let alone what other people hear from me.
Absolutely.
Versus if I'm just first thing getting up in the morning to right now we're recording in the evening, my voice sounds very different. And I'm talking to you differently than I might talk to somebody on the phone.
Yeah.
In prison. Our voices change. And fluctuate throughout the day and also throughout, life
and circumstance. And
it just doesn't make a lot of sense to pursue it this way. And it feels like a boondoggle, as my grandfather might have called it, just a way to collect more money from the prison system to say, we've got this cool tech that's going to help you catch more bad people.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always one of those things where I feel like I say this often, like who is sitting in these rooms making these decisions? And where is the person to say but actually list all the points that you just made. Right. And we should say, well, all right, maybe we shouldn't do this, but alas, here we are.
And even
using it.
If a tech company wants to pursue it, sure, that's how the system works right now. You get to do what you want to do. But according to their own patent, these prison systems shouldn't be subscribing to it or becoming partners with it. That doesn't make sense because it says that it's not going to do what you want it to do on its face.
Here we are. And another way to do things and harm people.
Yeah.
One of the other major pieces of all of this that I think this might bring us into application a little bit, but, Sarah talks about how this biometric information and data that's being collected is being used in ways that the government claims is in an effort to predict recidivism.
Yeah.
But how all of that is a way to do anything but actually address the real structural issues that are at play in our society. And the actual bona fide research that addresses the causes of recidivism. And so Sarah says, quote, in some research initiatives, the data gathered by biometric devices is already being analyzed and operationalized. In Indiana, a team of computer scientists and developers at Purdue University utilized such data in 2020 to train an AI algorithm to predict recidivism. According to the team's press release, the project, funded by the Department of Justice and conducted in collaboration with county-level corrections and law enforcement agencies, harvested data such as stress and heart rates via wearable bracelets and smartphones. The stated goal was to determine which physiological indicators are linked to an individual's risk of returning to their criminal behavior. But as scholar Brian Jefferson notes in Digitize and Punish, algorithms used for carceral means are not simply mathematical objects, but rather artifacts of governance designed to achieve specific objectives. By focusing on internal physiological states rather than structural conditions, such as access to housing, employment, healthcare, or social support, these models dismiss decades of work investigating recidivism and its social and economic causes. Those causes, as AI researchers Oz Keys and Chelsea Barbaras have noted, are already well understood. What remains unsettled is why emerging technologies continue to search for answers inside the body rather than in the systems that shape people's lives.
Right. Yep.
And so to me, it's already unsettling enough that this biometric data is even being collected. And we're talking about stress rates and veins and things like that. But at the same time, it's also not surprising at all that the government is more concerned about collecting this really intrusive data from people, sometimes without their consent, as you mentioned, instead of doing anything at all to actually address the real issues and structural conditions of our society that could actually help people. It's not surprising at all.
No, it's not. Based on all of the things that we've read, basically ever on this on this here podcast.
Yes.
So let's talk about application. Okay. How does this article apply to our day-to-day lives and work? Sarah closes this article with this quote, crime prediction algorithms, Ruha Benjamin aptly explains, should more accurately be called crime production algorithms. Biometric tools are likely to expand further across the criminal legal system as police departments, courts, and prisons increasingly turn to AI-driven surveillance and predictive technologies. These tools are being deployed most aggressively in communities that are already heavily policed and disproportionately criminalized. Preparing for and resisting this expansion requires a broader understanding of biometrics beyond facial recognition alone, including the many ways bodily data can be collected and put to use. Fighting to ban facial recognition is not enough. It must be part of a larger fight to stop carceral biometrics and advance digital abolition.
Yes.
I think this is such a wise point. We can't focus solely on these stories that I think break out into the mainstream press, which are typically facial recognition stories that Sarah opens this article with and that Dasha opened her article with that we read a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
We have to recognize how much this tech impacts all of us and how the biometric piece beyond facial recognition is all connected to really awful overreach of all of these systems into our private lives.
Yes.
And will continue to create more opportunity for the state and for eventually corporations, I think, to use that for their own benefit in whatever way they see fit.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if we allow it to happen here, where else might it happen? What other industries and applications might there be of it that impact more than, just the quote unquote criminals? It impacts all of us, right?
Yeah.
And we can't stop it at that point.
Right. And I think that if all this data exists, at some point somebody's going to either hack it or buy it.
Yeah.
And those things will be justified. And now some people will have it who shouldn't have it and should have never had it. And so that's just another thing for us to think about is what does collecting all this data mean for us long term?
Absolutely.
And what kind of power does that give to the government or whoever ends up with that data on the other side of a cyber attack or a buyout or whatever.
Yeah. And I think another reason why this is also important is, and why I feel like I've learned a lot from this, is that, as you said, it's beyond facial recognition. There's much more technology out there. And some of this is new to me. So that means it's probably new to a lot of people. And so as we start to learn more about it and understand what it is that, okay, this piece of tech is doing, tracking our eyes, injecting something in us, whatever it might be, taking our voices. I mean, when you start to really understand it, you realize how scary and unnecessary and like, whoa, we have to stop this.
Yes.
It is.
Yep.
So I love that application. My application comes from something Sarah says towards the end of the piece, not at the very end, but just about the dangers of all of this technology. So in her brilliant words, she says, quote, "Across these examples, a shared pattern emerges. The encoding of the body as evidence, often without the knowledge, consent, or recourse of those involved. This process strips people of their autonomy, dignity, and right against self-incrimination. Whether through DNA, eye movements, or physiological indicators of stress, these systems recast human bodies as sites of suspicion, deception, threat, or risk. Rather than eliminating human bias, they redistribute and reinforce it." And that to me is a rather sharp and spot on analysis of the dangers of this carceral AI technology. Anything that strips people of their autonomy, their dignity, their rights, their sense of self is simply not something that we need, and certainly doesn't need to be a tool of the death-making system that is the criminal punishment system. That, of course, was already a death-making system before all of this technology existed. It has been that since its creation. And so, like I said at the in our conversation about the first piece that we read in this series, this carceral AI technology is bad. It's a threat to all of us.
Yep.
And we have to stop it.
Yeah, full stop. I think that the your point about the carceral system being death making.
Yeah.
This is just making the machine more efficient for death, for collecting more people to eventually kill.
Yes.
And I think that that's what other reason do we need to have to be opposed to this?
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
How do we want to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? I'll take the obvious one, and then I'll add one that's maybe less obvious. We have to continue this series about carceral AI from Inquest.
Yes.
These two articles we've read from the series have been really, really informative and helpful for shaping my understanding of how this kind of AI tech is being used against so many people, and I would argue all of us in one way or another. And another piece of homework is a book that is referenced in this article that you actually referenced it earlier. It's Digitize and Punish by Brian Jefferson.
Yeah.
The tagline of which is Tracing the Rise of Digital Computing in Policing and Punishment and Its Harmful Impact on Criminalized Communities of Color. Yeah. So that feels like another way to dive into this topic even more and maybe get some more stories and data about how this stuff is being implemented across all of the criminal punishment system.
Yeah, that sounds great. All of that sounds great. So I feel like it's my homework to figure out which piece from this carceral AI series to bring to the table for us next so we can continue to learn for it. I feel like if we're tag teaming this, I'm up next. I'd also like to check out, I like to check out that book as well. But another thing I looked into is Sarah is a member of Survived and Punished California, and it looks like they've got some incredible resources, toolkits, videos, zines on their website, sort of akin to like interrupting criminalization, if you will, which we talk about a lot on this podcast. And so I feel like it'd be really cool to dig into some of their work, see what they've accomplished, and learn from their wisdom as well. So yeah,
that sounds great. We've interacted a little bit with some Survived and Punished stuff, I think.
Yes, I think through a resource it was mentioned. Yeah.
So it would be great to dive more into another organization, another chapter, so to speak, of this group.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Damien, that's it for our conversation today. And you're up next time. Yeah. What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
So I'm going to bring a piece from Truth Out to the table for us next week. It's called Over 160 Years After Abolition, Anti-Black Racism Still Structures U.S. Economy. It was written by C.J. Policronio and published just a few weeks ago, actually. And this piece is actually a conversation between C.J. and two economic scholars about how structural racism and anti-Black racism are still very much so alive and well here in the United States, and how they are a cornerstone of our present-day economy here in the United States. And so I'm really looking forward to learning more about this from these scholars. I should mention they are Michelle Holder and Jeanette Wicks-Lim, and they actually just recently published a book about all of this. So I'm sure we'll be able to learn more about all of this from them and this conversation that they have.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, looking forward to talking about that here with you next week. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.